Envision a conflict so vast it spanned from Alaska's icy wastelands to the humid Pacific rainforests. Countless U.S. troops were sent to distant lands they barely knew existed on any globe prior to the fighting. Now, get ready for the surprising twist. Upon arrival, they faced no shelters, no buildings, not even basic cover from the sky. Only sludge, downpours, and harsh weather pounding relentlessly. So, what approach did the American forces take? They skipped hauling timber across oceans. They avoided the hassle of constructing elaborate outposts. Instead, they devised one of the oddest but most practical innovations you might not have considered. The Quonset hut, a semicircular sheet metal tube that could spring up in any spot at any moment and protect lives. And prepare to have this figure etched in your mind. Over 100,000 such shelters were erected amid World War II. No mistake there. It was a torrent of metal and labor transformed into residences, medical facilities, headquarters, and even places of worship. Picture stepping onto a secluded Pacific atoll in 1943 and seeing one of these rise from the soil in just one day, prepared to accommodate scores of troops. It borders on the unbelievable, yet it happened. The real eye-opener? These weren't mere wartime patches. They sparked a subtle shift in supply chains and accommodations. Consider this. The global conflict extended beyond gunfire and vehicles. It hinged on logistics, setups, and ensuring fighters stayed nourished, protected, and combat-ready. The Germans relied on their bunkers. The Japanese used their hideouts in rock faces. But Americans boasted a collapsible, transportable, resilient shelter that shipped in pieces, went together with a small team, and endured raging storms. That's the sort of advantage overlooked in blockbuster films. But it tipped the scales. And if you're dismissing it as just a shelter, here's why it merits your attention. They lingered long after the battle ceased. Post-1945, they wove into everyday U.S. existence. University housing, places of faith, eateries, and even quarters for vets returning via the GI Bill. A few endure now, corroded yet tenacious echoes of an era when America produced military essentials at an unprecedented rhythm. So in this piece, we'll explore the origins of the Quonset hut, its rapid expansion worldwide, the actual experience of dwelling within, and how a short-term creation left an enduring mark on the past. It's a tale of metal, toil, and pure Yankee resourcefulness, and believe me, you'll view a semicircle differently forever. By the end of 1941, the U.S. confronted a supply crisis of epic proportions. The Pearl Harbor assault thrust America into a worldwide struggle, requiring forces everywhere on Earth. Vast numbers of soldiers prepared to deploy, each demanding sustenance, hydration, and overhead protection. Yet the challenge loomed large. How to accommodate a force in perpetual motion? Conventional timber quarters demanded excessive time, and transporting dense building supplies over vast distances proved impossible. The armed services required an alternative, swift, affordable, movable, and durable against everything from snowstorms to heavy rains. This pressure went beyond mere ease. Troops battling in North Africa's deserts, isolated Pacific specks, or Alaska's bitter cold couldn't risk debilitation from the elements. An ill or drained fighter meant more than a single loss. It disrupted the entire front line. U.S. strategists understood the housing issue had to be addressed swiftly to prevent defeats. The issue wasn't whether a fix would emerge, it was the speed of its arrival. And that's when the Navy took charge. In the beginning of 1941, prior to Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy foresaw the demand for relocatable quarters at growing installations. They rejected cumbersome canvases that tore easily in gales. They shunned timber huts that decayed in tropical dampness. They sought a design packable into crates, deliverable globally, and assemblable with basic equipment. The sort of edifice that personnel could raise in mere hours, not months. Previously, the U.S. military had tested the Nissan Hut, a UK creation from the prior war, developed in 1916 by Major Peter Nissan. It featured a similar arched metal form employed by the British in Europe. However, U.S. designers deemed it insufficient. They aimed for greater ease, robustness, and optimization for large-scale manufacturing in domestic plants. Essentially, a distinctly American adaptation. Enter Quonset Point, Rhode Island, into the narrative. There, the Navy ordered the initial model of what became known as the Quonset hut. The moment was perfectly timed. As the country geared up for all-out combat in 1941, the push intensified to produce not only arms and vessels, but a whole adaptable network to support the soldiers destined for battle were already on the horizon. Thus, when U.S. forces began deploying in the spring of 1942, the foundations for their temporary shelters were firmly in place. That unassuming arched enclosure turned out to be the solution to one of World War II's most pressing supply challenges. It lacked any sense of grandeur or spectacle. Yet, absent this innovation, countless troops would have faced the elements unprotected, at risk not only from hostile attacks, but from the unforgiving forces of climate and landscape. This went far beyond mere construction. It was a matter of life and death. And the United States was poised to demonstrate that tackling such dilemmas swiftly and on a massive scale ranked among its top assets in the conflict. In 1941, when the Navy issued a request for an innovative shelter, the project fell to the designers and specialists at George A. Fuller Company, based at the Davisville Naval Construction Battalion Center in Rhode Island. The requirements seemed basic in theory, but daunting in execution. Develop a shelter that was lightweight, affordable, collapsible, transportable, and simple for novices to put together using minimal equipment. It needed to endure extreme conditions, from sweltering jungles to freezing tundras and all variations. Their solution was elegantly straightforward. Envision a semi-cylindrical frame formed from corrugated metal panels, forming a 16 by 36-foot enclosure. The curved profile served a practical purpose, providing exceptional durability so that precipitation and gusts could glide away effortlessly. Plywood sections at the ends allowed for the addition of entrances, openings for light or airflow controls, tailored to local weather and function. Internally, options included adding protective linings or keeping it stark. The whole assembly rested on a basic timber or cement base, adapted to the terrain. Early models emerged at Quonset Point during the summer of 1941, inspiring the name for these structures. They offered no frills, they provided no comforts, but they precisely met the Navy's demands. Compact enough to crate for sea or air transport, these units could travel vast distances and then be fastened together rapidly on site. A team of 6 to 8 personnel could erect one within 24 hours. Contrast that with the days or weeks required to nail together conventional quarters, and it's clear why the Quonset hut gained immediate popularity. The original blueprint had its limitations. The 16-foot span felt confining for broader applications. Engineers soon broadened it to 20 feet and later to 40-foot models. Adaptations soon appeared for diverse roles, including sleeping quarters, dining areas, administrative spaces, medical facilities, and worship sites. The adaptable format permitted connecting units, lengthening them, or altering them as circumstances demanded. Such versatility proved invaluable in combat areas where requirements shifted abruptly. By the end of 1941, the Navy had committed to enormous quantities. The blueprint was set, and manufacturing plants started producing metal panels in bulk. The Quonset hut entered full-scale output right as the nation grappled with the shock of Pearl Harbor. When American forces arrived at Guadalcanal in August 1942, these shelters stood ready to provide cover. In hindsight, the Quonset hut might seem like a foregone conclusion, but that wasn't the case. It arose from a pressing crisis, blending manufacturing prowess with functional ingenuity. Lacking Quonset Point, that initial Navy directive, or the swift efforts of those experts, the Pacific Campaign, and perhaps more, could have unfolded quite differently. What made the Quonset hut so remarkable was its unpretentiousness, metal curves, wooden closures, and reliability. Wherever U.S. personnel were dispatched, they could count on a basic refuge, even if only briefly. After settling on the design in 1941, America didn't merely construct Quonset huts. It manufactured them in staggering volumes. The nation's production capacity was ramping up for icons like Liberty ships, Sherman tanks, and B-17 bombers. Including a shelter in the mix appeared modest by comparison, yet it emerged as one of the era's most abundant military items. By 1945, over 100,000 units had poured from assembly lines, capable of accommodating vast forces. The key lay in the approach that fueled U.S. war manufacturing: high-volume replication. Plants nationwide retooled to fabricate corrugated panels, shape plywood components, and assemble complete kits with all fasteners, hardware, and guides. Each unit arrived as a compact package, tipping the scales at roughly 5 tons. It fit neatly into a Liberty ship's cargo bay with vehicles, supplies, and munitions, then unloaded at any global outpost. The Fuller Company and its partners skipped elaborate schematics. Standardization ruled, enabling construction akin to automotive lines. Sizes stayed consistent, components swapped seamlessly, and directions remained straightforward. A Quonset hut shipment resembled an oversized construction kit for adults, with elements that formed the essential backbone. The tale of Quonset huts paints a vivid portrait of a worldwide conflict. The statistics reveal the full extent. Back in 1942, the Navy demanded more than 25,000 units right away, and output surged even faster afterward. Plants in Rhode Island, New Jersey, and eventually throughout the Midwest operated non-stop. By 1943, whole vessels departed U.S. harbors loaded solely with Quonset hut components, plus the personnel skilled in putting them together. The urgency was such that assembly outpaced the armed forces' plans for their placement. Yet the true wonder lay in the minimal crew required to erect one. Just 6 or 8 troops armed with tools and nails could complete a structure in under 24 hours. Without heavy machinery, expert woodworkers, or on-the-spot architects, it relied purely on labor and prefabricated pieces. This rapidity allowed freshly seized islands to evolve into operational outposts in mere days. Runways gained quarters for aviators, dining areas for mess facilities, and rooms for headquarters. An empty swath of wilderness could morph into a compact settlement within a week. It's revealing to contrast this with adversaries. As German units hunkered down in fortified positions and Japanese outposts tunneled into mountainsides, U.S. troops erected metal communities that sprang up in moments. It lacked flair. Yet wherever the American banner appeared, a viable camp trailed right after. When the war concluded, output stats matched some of the largest industrial efforts of the era. Quonset huts transcended mere shelters. They embodied the U.S. capacity to surpass foes in manufacturing, provisioning, and construction. Deploying troops abroad was one challenge, but supplying them with a pre-packed dwelling at every stop was a game-changer. Residing in a Quonset hut marked a novel chapter for most U.S. servicemen. For countless, it was their initial venture far from familiar surroundings, with their new abode consisting of an arched frame of galvanized metal rooted in unfamiliar terrain. These weren't plush retreats, but versus enduring soggy, icy bivouacs, they felt like salvation. Interiors varied by region. In the South Pacific swelter, linings combated the oppressive warmth, while netting warded off swarms of insects. In frosty zones like Alaska or Northern Europe, heaters, occasionally 2 per unit, fought off the cold. Timber bases lifted occupants above the muck, and simple dividers offered a touch of seclusion. Even so, troops recalled them as resonant, cavernous spaces that baked under the sun. But the key point is this: Quonset huts served far beyond sleeping quarters. Their versatility let them become anything the Army required on the spot. Certain ones functioned as eateries where troops queued for meals in droves. Others shifted into medical stations lined with beds and laced with medicinal scents. Units doubled as worship spaces featuring rough-hewn shrines beneath the dome, where far-flung fighters joined in songs of faith, or as control centers, warehouses, training rooms, and even screening venues for impromptu films. Anything requiring cover, a Quonset hut could provide. A serviceman landing at a spot like Wad Canal in 1943 would witness a rapid spread of these structures, converting raw foliage into a working installation. They instilled an odd aura of stability amid otherwise strange and unforgiving environs. Emblems of Yankee ingenuity, they demonstrated that regardless of posting, a measure of organization and solidity accompanied you. Naturally, drawbacks existed. The metal sides amplified downpours to a roar. In equatorial zones, interiors turned into saunas. Airflow was typically inadequate, and moisture could twist the timber sections. Troops improvised, though, fashioning ad hoc blowers, hacking additional vents, and exerting effort to render them habitable. After all, relative to trenches or exposed shelters, they represented progress. Correspondents from GIs back home frequently referenced the huts, blending jest, gripes, and thanks for the barrier against weather. As one Pacific-based Marine put it, "She may not be a beauty, but she blocks the downpour. That's plenty for any guy." And crucially, these huts delivered an uncanny touch of routine. You could suspend your kit from a hook, arrange your bunk, and rest assured that, for the evening at least, the wilds or sands held no sway. For troops distant from their roots, that modest reassurance outshone riches. The Quonset hut extended beyond U.S. installations, proliferating worldwide in the wake of advancing American units. From Normandy's shores to New Guinea's thickets, these semicircular havens wove into the fabric of World War II scenery. In the most isolated spots, clusters of them typically formed the core of any outpost. In the Pacific, they were essential. During the 1943 landing of U.S. Marines on Tarawa or the early 1945 assault on Iwo Jima, securing a base went beyond mere territory. It involved constructing vital facilities. Quonset huts delivered that capability right away. Airports required observation towers, communication centers, meteorological outposts, and repair facilities. Rather than enduring weeks of building delays, operators unpacked shipments, assembled metal frames, and soon transformed a desolate atoll into a hub of structures. Certain Pacific installations featured scores of these units laid out like modest settlements, including pathways and markers. Over in Europe, their importance was equally vital. Following the June 1944 D-Day invasion, as coalition forces advanced further into French territory, Quonset huts trailed right after. They emerged in Normandy, serving as provisional medical centers for casualties, administrative hubs for supply coordinators, and quarters for construction units. When harsh winter gripped the Ardennes amid the Battle of the Bulge, these shelters offered warmth, providing respite for soldiers from the icy Belgian woodlands. Yet the most remarkable uses came in harsh conditions. In Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, the designs endured gale-force gales and severe frost. In North Africa, crews erected them in sandy outposts beneath scorching skies, their arched metal tops deflecting sunlight more effectively than fabric coverings. Across all settings, the core idea held true. Prefabricated units could be transported and assembled quicker than conventional builds. The worldwide reach was immense. By 1945, Quonset huts dotted every continent save Antarctica. Troops quipped that the gleaming semicircular profiles on the skyline marked American outposts. They evolved into emblems of U.S. forces, familiar at a glance to ordinary folks unfamiliar with them. And it wasn't solely U.S. forces relying on them. Partner countries obtained Quonset huts via Lend-Lease aid, deploying in the UK, Australia, and the USSR too. Their appeal stemmed from reliability and unmatched mass production for portable shelters. So prevalent were they that many servicemen figured they'd endure indefinitely. These structures converted empty aisles into operational hubs, imposed structure on disorder, and supplied the backbone for campaigns far from native soil. If conflict hinges on supply chains, the Quonset hut ranked among America's overlooked assets. As hostilities ceased in 1945, whether on a Pacific atoll, a rural French field, or a frozen northern station, those distinctive arcs loomed against the horizon. They showed that the U.S. hadn't merely sent personnel abroad, it had exported a full way of life alongside them. Once peace arrived in 1945, folks figured the Quonset hut would vanish along with the fighting. These metal curves were designed for short-term use, a hasty remedy for pressing needs. Reality unfolded differently. They embarked on a fresh chapter, influencing the post-war U.S. in unforeseen manners. Initially, the challenge loomed large, handling the excess units. With over 100,000 produced, the armed services faced a glut. Some got broken down for salvage, while others returned stateside or remained abroad. The moment aligned ideally, as the nation grappled with a severe shortage of dwellings. Countless veterans streamed back from European and Pacific theaters, and the GI Bill sparked a boom in higher education attendance. Urban areas and campuses urgently required housing for these returnees and their households. Quonset huts offered a prompt answer. Nationwide, institutions created whole clusters of them for ex-servicemen. Take the University of Michigan. Vets and kin resided in Quonset communities equipped with cooking areas, sleeping quarters, and modest outdoor spaces. Similar setups appeared at places like the University of Minnesota, Brown, and UCLA. These setups lacked luxury. Spouses often wisecracked about preparing meals in a rounded shelter, yet they proved economical, swift to erect, and superior to alternatives. Outside academia, entire districts of Quonset huts arose in communities. Conversions turned them into places of worship, eateries, and social venues. Entrepreneurs snapped up extras for studios, auto bays, and storage areas. Rural operators prized them as livestock enclosures and tool houses. For a cohort shaped by wartime shortages, such prefabricated options seemed like windfalls. Their legacy extended beyond borders. Abroad, wartime remnants integrated into native societies. In spots like the Philippines, Guam, and sections of Europe, locals repurposed them as residences, educational sites, and retail spaces well after U.S. withdrawal. Intended to disappear post-war, these huts turned into icons of endurance and rebuilding. That said, flaws persisted. Households griped about inadequate thermal barriers, dripping ceilings, and the relentless groan of corrugated steel filled the air. Winters bit with fierce chill, while summers baked under intense heat. Yet, for countless people, these simple structures offered a sense of security amid the turmoil of the post-war era. They served as a temporary haven, providing shelter until more solid homes could be constructed. Remarkably, certain Quonset huts simply wouldn't fade away. Through the 1950s and 1960s, thousands persisted, reinforced with fresh panels, panes, or padding. These days, authentic Quonset huts from that time still speckle the American countryside, some weathered and forgotten, others repurposed as sheds or garages. What began as an urgent wartime fix ultimately transformed everyday life in peacetime. The Quonset hut transcended its role as mere cover. It linked the turmoil of conflict to the optimism of renewal. Much like the troops who inhabited them, these shelters demonstrated remarkable resilience beyond all predictions. Almost 80 years following the close of World War II, the Quonset hut remains a fixture. Indeed, it stands as a lasting emblem of wartime innovation, highlighting how U.S. manufacturing prowess tackled challenges worldwide. Travel through various regions of the country, and you'll still notice them. Those semicircular frames of rippled metal defiantly upright in meadows, on university grounds or near outbuildings. A few bear the scars of time and corrosion, while others receive careful upkeep, yet each one echoes an identical tale, erected swiftly, affordably, and sturdily. The influence of the Quonset hut extends far beyond mere reminiscence. Scholars of design and history frequently cite it as an early model for contemporary prefabricated dwellings. The idea of delivering flattened components for on-location assembly mirrors what we now link to brands like IKEA. However, back in 1941, the nation was already executing this on a massive industrial level. The structure demonstrated that adaptable, component-based construction could prove effective and expansive. It ignited discussions in the years after the war regarding addressing home shortages via factory-made residences. To those who served, the huts held deep sentimental value. Numerous recalled them as the setting for their service days, the spot for penning messages to loved ones, sharing jokes with fellow fighters, or sinking into weary rest post combat. For ordinary folks, these huts turned into an odd yet recognizable feature, scattered from Rhode Island out to isolated islands in the Pacific, representing not only armed strength but also the nation's knack for quick thinking and flexibility. On a broader level, the Quonset hut gained a sort of legendary aura. Painters captured them on canvas, movies featured them in scenes, and authors invoked them as a quick emblem of the war years. Come the 1950s, they had woven into the fabric of U.S. entertainment, capturing both the hardship of battle and the aspiration for recovery. In certain communities, locals continued to assemble in gathering halls that originated as excess Quonset huts, their arched ceilings spanning events like social dances, assemblies, and worship gatherings. The narrative continues onward. Today, in the 21st century, designers and hands-on creators are revisiting the Quonset shape for sustainable homes and budget-friendly refugees. The core ideas that succeeded in 1942, straightforwardness, toughness, and economic value, resonate just as strongly now. Certain firms produce updated versions of Quonset-inspired builds for agricultural use, studios, and residences, showing the foundational blueprint has always stayed relevant. Perhaps the most compelling inheritance is this. Those shelters were intended as fleeting, yet akin to the service members they once housed, they persevered. They evolved into emblems of an era's hardships and victories, remaining as quiet observers to the conflict that altered the globe. So the next occasion you encounter one of those arched metal forms poised silently along a highway, recall that unassuming shelter aided in securing global victory, accommodated troops across every landmass, and influenced after-war existence in unforeseen manners. In its understated manner, the Quonset hut ranks alongside icons like the Jeep, the Sherman tank, or the Liberty ship as a hallmark of World War II. Evidence that the most basic fixes can cast the most enduring legacies.